Hey everybody and welcome back. Ready to really get into it this time. We're going deep on autism, but getting real about how race and privilege play a part, all based on what you guys sent in from Cheap ABA.
Yeah, this is some heavy stuff.
No kidding. These articles don't mess around, so let's jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
One of the first things that whacked me in the face reading all this was how different diagnoses is depending on, a person's race.
It's true. And it's not even just do you get diagnosed or not, but when. Those articles talked about how black kids are often diagnosed way later than white kids. I mean, can you imagine? Those early years are so important.
Totally. It's like you miss the early chapters of the how-to manual and suddenly everything's harder. And we're not talking a small difference here.
Yeah.
One article had this study: black kids were 19% less likely to get an autism diagnosis compared to white kids, just straight up.
And it gets worse, right? Because then instead of autism, they get labeled with behavioral problems. And it's like this awful domino effect from there. They aren't getting the right help. They're being seen through the wrong lens. And all because of these systemic barriers baked right into healthcare.
Okay, so hold up. Let's break it down. Systemic barriers.
Yeah.
What we mean is these obstacles that are part of how the whole system is built. Doesn't even have to be someone trying to be racist. It's just the way it shakes out, it disadvantages certain groups here, autistic people of color.
It's almost like a maze, but some people start off with parts blocked, or they get pointed the wrong way more often, even if the maze itself looks the same at a glance, and the finish line is just getting the diagnosis and support you should be able to.
Makes you wonder how many kids are out there struggling just because of their skin color. And that brings us to white privilege, which, I'll be honest, can be a tough conversation.
For sure.
But these articles, they just go straight at it.
Yeah. And it's not about saying your life's been easy if you're white. It just means it hasn't been harder because you are.
Right.
And in the autism world, that plays out in all sorts of ways.
Will doctors even listen to your concerns? Can you afford the good therapy places? Or are those networks even set up for you? Heck, do you even see yourself in the media, in the groups, speaking up for autistic folks?
The cheap ABA stuff, they pointed to this one study. Families of color statistically way less likely to access autism services compared to white families.
Yeah.
It's money sometimes, but also just bias woven in.
And even in schools, right? Some research shows autistic kids of color get in way more trouble for the same behaviors as white kids. The system is rigged from the get-go.
And what's really scary is when you add in misinformation, which these articles are all over.
Yeah, they go deep on that.
It's hard enough to deal with these barriers, but then you throw in false info, especially about autism.
It's like dumping gasoline on a fire, right?
Yeah.
And they kept bringing up Elon Musk and his whole thing on vaccines. Now, agree or disagree with the guy, that's not the point. It's the megaphone he's got and how his words land, especially because...
Well, the research they were citing, it suggests some autistic folks might be more likely to believe misinformation in the first place.
Yeah.
That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
We're not just talking theory here. This has a real impact.
So whoa, we're talking systemic barriers, we're talking misinformation. And then on top of that, the autistic community itself might be more vulnerable to that bad info. Where do we even start to fix this?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
The articles, they kept saying awareness is just step one. Good for you. You know the problem exists. Now what? The cheap ABA folks, they want action. And a big part of that is autistic people of color, they got to be the ones leading the way.
It's that saying, right? Nothing about us without us. Researching is one thing, but the solutions, they got to come from the folks actually living it.
Exactly. Because their experience, researchers, policymakers, whoever, they might miss stuff. And it's more than just listening. It's getting those voices amplified so they're heard at every level. Advocacy groups, studies, everything.
Makes you wonder, how many good ideas are we missing out on just because we aren't tuned to the right channels? And for folks like us who want to be allies, where do we fit in? They kept talking about unpacking white privilege, which honestly sounds kind of intimidating.
I hear you. It can be uncomfortable, for sure.
Yeah.
Think of it this way, though. Two autistic people, they need help, right? One's white, one's black. White person, they might breeze through, no problem. Black person, roadblock after roadblock. That difference, that's a glimpse into white privilege right there.
Right.
Not saying anything else about those people's lives, just that. That's one way it shows up.
Okay, so acknowledging it, step one. Then what? What does being a good ally actually look like in this situation?
It's showing up consistently, educating yourself, but also challenging your own biases. Because let's be real, we all got them. And then whatever privilege you do have, using it to push for change.
So that could be calling out racist jokes when you hear them. Supporting those organizations led by people of color within the autism world.
100%. And the article is actually named a couple,
Yeah.
like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the Autism Women's Network. They're doing great work, but it's intersectional, you know?
Right, taking on all these things at once.
Yep. And donating helps, but it's more than that, right? Spreading the word about what they're doing, volunteering, using your own skills to back them up.
So we got elevating those voices, supporting the right groups. What about just like one-on-one, those awkward conversations that maybe we need to be having more?
Don't underestimate those.
Yeah.
Just bringing it up with your friends, your family, it normalizes it, makes it less taboo to even talk about race and privilege, which is huge.
And remembering it's not just about inclusion, which sounds nice, but kind of vague. It's about the actual harm racism does that matters.
Exactly. This is in theory, right? It's healthcare disparities, it's education gaps, job discrimination.
Right.
It's daily life for a lot of autistic people of color. We can't just ignore that.
So it's like, it's got to be both, right? Big system change and into the individuals doing what they can, fighting misinformation, but also teaching people how to think for themselves better. No easy answers here.
It's about changing how we see the world, honestly, and our place in it. Every person has value, they deserve respect, and we got to dismantle anything that says otherwise.
It's like saying, what happened to you, it matters. Your voice matters, and we're going to fight for that. That's powerful.
It really is. And, you know, something we haven't even touched on yet is how this whole misinformation thing, it hits autistic people of color even harder.
Oh, right. We talked about misinformation overall, but you're saying there's a whole other layer when it's already a marginalized community within the autistic community. Tell me more.
Yeah. It's kind of like, imagine, right? You're already in a world that's not really built for you. Those barriers we talked about, they're everywhere. Then on top of that, you got misinformation flying around. And if you're autistic, maybe you're more wired to trust what people tell you directly, or you miss those social cues that say, hey, this ain't right. Dangerous combo.
It's what those cheap ABA folks were getting at. Some of that research does say autistic people, they might be quicker to believe stuff that's just wrong. And if you're a person of color on top of that, I mean, history's shown how messed up the medical system's been, so there's already that distrust. It's like a perfect storm of vulnerability.
Exactly. One article even shared this story. Black mother, hesitant to vaccinate her autistic son. Because online, she's seeing all this misinformation, a lot of it aimed specifically AT Black communities. Just awful.
It really makes you think, misinformation, it's not just, oh, you got the wrong facts.
Yep.
It has this ripple effect. And people already up against it, they get hit the hardest.
It's true. And it makes things like media literacy. That's crucial for everybody, but especially for autistic folks.
You got to be able to judge your sources, spot bias, think for yourself, big important skills these days.
Almost like we need digital self-defense 101 or something. Haha.
Okay.
Because it's not even just protecting yourself from bad info. It's about autistic people being able to make their own good choices for their own lives.
Yes. It's about agency. Autistic folks, whatever their race, they deserve accurate info so they can decide what's best for them. That connects back to what we were saying before, right? It's got to be the people most affected. Their voices need to be heard. Enough with this will protect you thing. It's about empowering, working with people, not over them.
So wrapping up here, kind of heavy stuff, no doubt about it. But knowing there are folks out there fighting, organizations doing the work, that gives me hope.
Me too. And look, nobody expects you to have all the answers or fix everything by yourself. Just show up, stay informed. Your voice, what you share online, your money if you got it.
Yep.
Use it to make things better however you can. It's a marathon, right? Making the world more just, more equal for autistic people. But every step, every conversation, every action, it gets us closer.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive, it's given us a lot to chew on. If any of this hit home for you, go check out those cheap ABA articles. They're worth a read. And remember, a more inclusive world, that starts with each of us.
Thanks for diving in with us today.